Rukiah woke up to the warm sunlight spilling through the thin curtains of her small rented room in Kampala. For a moment, she just lay there, feeling the steady flutter of life inside her belly, thinking it was going to be a normal morning. Then her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She picked it up, expecting a good morning message from Cato, but what she saw made her stomach drop. "You need to leave. Pack your things. Now." The words were short, sharp, and cold. No explanation. No apology. Just a command that felt like a punch to the gut. She stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing to understand. The man she had laughed with, who had promised to stand by her, had disappeared behind cruelty. Her mind raced through memories of their wedding, the music, the smiles, the way Cato had looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. All of that now seemed like a story someone else had told, a beautiful lie that had ended abruptly. Outside, she could hear neighbors murmuring, voices trailing along the corridor. She imagined them whispering about her, about Cato's betrayal. The shame, anger, and disbelief churned inside her at once. Rukiah wrapped her arms around her belly, taking slow breaths. She realized she had to get up, pack, face the world, but for the first time, she also felt something else stirring, a quiet, fierce determination. She wasn't just alone. She had a life inside her, and she would not let this break her. Rukiah spent the next few days in a haze. Every knock on the door, every passing glance from neighbors seemed to carry judgment. Slowly, whispers and rumors began to reach her ears, cutting sharper than any words Cato had written. He wasn't just leaving her, he was planning to marry someone else. Amina, a young woman from his office. The thought hit Rukiah like a wave crashing over her. She couldn't understand how someone she had trusted, shared dreams and fears with, could betray her so completely. Her sister, Nala, was the first real lifeline. She arrived one evening with a small bundle of food, the smell of freshly cooked stew filling the tiny room. Nala didn't offer empty reassurances. She sat beside Rukiah, held her hand, and let her cry. "This is not the end," she said softly. "You are stronger than you know, and you have a little life depending on you." The words felt heavy at first, but they sank in slowly, embedding themselves like seeds. For the first time since that cruel text, Rukiah felt a flicker of hope. Rukiah began to notice things around her more clearly. She noticed how her body ached from worry, how her heart seemed both fragile and fierce. The betrayal stung, but a new thought began to take root. Her survival wasn't just about getting over heartbreak. It was about protecting the tiny life growing inside her, the child who depended on her courage. Each day, she forced herself to eat, to move, to breathe through the fear. She started writing in a small notebook, jotting down memories, names, and dates. Anything that might help her later. The whispers outside her window didn't hurt as much anymore. She realized she didn't need to live under Cato's shadow. Even as anger and sorrow mixed inside her, a sense of determination began to bloom. This betrayal was personal and painful, but it also became the spark she needed to think about the future, not just the past. She began imagining a life where she and her child were safe, supported, and free from the cruelty she had been dealt. With Nala by her side and a growing awareness of her own strength, Rukiah felt the first stirrings of empowerment. She was still scared, yes, but she was also beginning to see a path forward. Betrayal had knocked her down, but it had not defeated her. She would survive. She would fight. And most of all, she would protect her child, no matter the cost. Rukiah left her small rented room with a heavy heart but a determined mind. She packed a duffel bag with the few belongings she could carry, clothes, important documents, and the little notebook where she had been writing down everything she could remember about Cato's betrayal. Each step outside felt both freeing and terrifying. The streets of Kampala were busy, yet she felt invisible, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Her godmother, Zuri, welcomed her with open arms. Zuri's home was warm and alive, filled with the smell of simmering spices and the quiet hum of people moving about. She didn't ask questions at first, only guided Rukiah inside, helped her unpack, and offered a cup of tea. "You're safe here," she said firmly. Those words, simple as they were, sank into Rukiah's heart like sunlight breaking through clouds. Over the next few days, Zuri introduced Rukiah to a group of women who had faced their own betrayals and hardships. They met in a small living room, laughter and tears mingling freely, and each story mirrored pieces of Rukiah's pain. Some had been abandoned by husbands, some had fought to reclaim what was theirs, and others had found new paths entirely. They shared advice on legal matters, financial independence, and emotional strength. They didn't pity her, they empowered her. One woman, holding her own child, said gently, "You are not alone. You have a voice. Use it." That phrase echoed in Rukiah's mind long after the meeting ended. For the first time in weeks, Rukiah felt a sense of possibility. She began thinking about long-term solutions instead of letting despair dictate her life. The women helped her plan small steps. opening a secure bank account, keeping careful records, and even considering work-from-home opportunities that could support her and her child. Zuri taught her simple self-care routines, rest, proper meals, and gentle walks, reminding her that strength came not just from fighting, but also from caring for herself. Ruqayya also found comfort in small, everyday moments. Sharing meals, laughing over minor frustrations, and hearing encouragement in the late evenings built a quiet resilience inside her. She realized that while Kato had tried to take control of her life, she still had choices. She still had the power to protect herself and her unborn child. By the end of the week, Ruqayya felt a shift within herself. The fear and heartbreak were still there, but they were no longer paralyzing. She had allies, a safe space, and a growing confidence that she could face whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, Ruqayya dared to imagine a future where she was not just surviving, but moving toward reclaiming her life. Ruqayya spent her days at Zuri's home slowly piecing together what had really happened. She realized that to survive, she needed to see clearly and act carefully. She began collecting everything she could find: bank statements, property papers, messages from Kato, and even notes from encounters with his family. Every receipt, every text, every document became a small piece of a bigger puzzle, one that she needed to understand if she was going to protect herself and her unborn child. As she dug deeper, the truth became more shocking. Kato had secretly sold part of the house they had shared, transferring the money straight into Amina's account. He had made decisions that directly affected Ruqayya without her knowledge, betraying the trust and partnership their marriage had once represented. Even more unsettling were the messages from his family, veiled threats and warnings, trying to intimidate her into silence. At first, Ruqayya felt dizzy with anger and betrayal. The depth of Kato's deceit cut deep, but it also lit a spark inside her. Every discovery, though painful, gave her more clarity. She realized that Kato hadn't just abandoned her emotionally. He had tried to take away everything she had worked for, everything she deserved. But now, armed with evidence, Ruqayya began to feel a strange mix of fear and empowerment. She started organizing her findings, creating folders for each type of document, noting down dates, amounts, and messages. The act of writing it all down made the betrayal tangible, but it also made her feel in control for the first time since receiving that terrible text. Ruqayya also noticed how her mindset was shifting. She no longer felt like a victim trapped by circumstances. Each piece of evidence she uncovered was a step toward reclaiming her life. She imagined the day she would confront Kato, not with anger or tears, but with facts, proof, and unwavering resolve. The fear that had gnawed at her for weeks began to feel manageable, replaced by a quiet, steady determination. She knew the road ahead would be hard, but now she had direction. Even in the quiet of Zuri's living room, surrounded by supportive women and the comforting smells of home-cooked meals, Ruqayya felt the first real sense of purpose in weeks. Her focus shifted from heartbreak to strategy. She wasn't just fighting for revenge, she was fighting for justice, for safety, and for the life of the child growing inside her. With every document organized and every secret uncovered, Ruqayya felt herself standing taller, more ready to face Kato and anyone who had thought they could control her. By the end of the week, Ruqayya had a clear understanding of what she was up against, and more importantly, a plan forming in her mind. She wasn't powerless anymore. The betrayal had been cruel, but it had also awakened something inside her, a determination to protect herself, to reclaim her dignity, and to take back control of her life. Ruqayya knew that to truly protect herself and her unborn child, she needed more than courage and evidence. She needed the law on her side. Zuri recommended a lawyer she trusted, and soon Ruqayya found herself sitting in Musa's modest office, the smell of paper and ink surrounding her. Musa listened carefully as she explained everything: Kato's betrayal, the secret property sales, the transferred money, and the messages from his family. He didn't rush her or make her feel small. Instead, he laid out exactly what steps they could take. Musa explained that the law could protect her rights to marital property, custody of her child, and even compensation for the financial losses Kato had caused. He talked about restraining orders that could prevent Kato and his family from harassing her, and protective measures that could keep her safe during the pregnancy. Ruqayya felt a mixture of relief and determination. Finally, there was a concrete path forward. Together, they began preparing documents. Ruqayya handed Musa every bank statement, message, and property paper she had collected. Musa guided her on what would be most useful in court: proof of Kato's secret dealings, records of threats, and evidence of her financial and emotional contributions during the marriage. As they worked, Ruqayya realized how much power knowledge could give her. Each piece of paper she organized, every statement she clarified, was a brick in the foundation of her defense. Musa also helped her understand the importance of timing and strategy. They discussed filing for custody of her child and securing her share of the marital home before Cato could do anything to interfere. He encouraged her to remain calm and focused, reminding her that anger could cloud judgment, but preparation and evidence would speak louder than tears. Ruqayyah felt a growing sense of control. The panic and helplessness that had plagued her were slowly being replaced by clear, actionable steps. Over the next few days, Ruqayyah immersed herself in the preparation. She created folders, lists, and timelines of events. Every document was double-checked, every message cataloged. Even small details, who had witnessed certain conversations or transactions, were carefully noted. With Musa's guidance, she began to see that she was not just defending herself. She was building a case that would hold up, showing clearly that Cato could not override her rights or threaten her family's future. By the end of their first few sessions, Ruqayyah felt a sense of calm determination she hadn't felt in. She realized that legal strategy wasn't just about winning in court. It was about reclaiming her sense of agency, protecting her child, and sending a message that betrayal and intimidation would not go unanswered. The law, once abstract and distant, now felt like a shield she could wield. With Musa's guidance, Ruqayyah was ready to take the next step, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, courage, and the desire to protect what mattered most. Ruqayyah realized that even with the law on her side, she needed more than papers and evidence. She needed people who would stand with her. With Zuri's encouragement, she began quietly reaching out through social media and local networks, sharing her story in a way that was honest but careful. She didn't post out of anger or to shame Cato. She shared facts, her journey, and her fears. She wanted the truth to be seen so that Cato couldn't twist it or paint her as the villain. The response was unexpected. Messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers who had faced similar betrayals. Some offered emotional support, simply listening to her fears and reassuring her she wasn't alone. Others pledged concrete help. People she barely knew offered witness statements to confirm what she had experienced or promised financial assistance and childcare if she needed it. With each message, Ruqayyah felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was gathering allies. The visibility of her story began to put subtle pressure on Cato and his family. They couldn't ignore the fact that people were watching, questioning, and documenting everything. Ruqayyah noticed the change in their behavior: cold looks, curt messages, and a carefulness that had never been there before. Without lifting a finger, she was showing them that their attempts to control her would no longer work. The network she had built was like a quiet shield, surrounding her with accountability and support. Even outside social media, Ruqayyah found comfort in small acts of community. Neighbors she had once feared judging her began checking in, offering a meal, a kind word, or a listening ear. Zuri and the women she had met before continued to give guidance, helping her plan every next step while keeping her safe. Ruqayyah realized that her story had a ripple effect. By speaking up, she not only protected herself, but also gave strength to other women in similar situations. The combination of legal preparation and public support created a powerful sense of empowerment. Ruqayyah started to see her own story as more than just tragedy. It was becoming a story of resilience, courage, and strategy. Each day, she documented interactions carefully, kept her supporters informed, and refined her approach to ensure that Cato couldn't manipulate the narrative. By the end of those weeks, Ruqayyah felt a quiet confidence she hadn't known before. The betrayal still hurt, but she was no longer isolated or defenseless. She had allies, a plan, and a growing sense of control. With the public on her side and the law ready to back her, she was prepared to face Cato when the time came, showing him that her strength wasn't just in her evidence, but in the community and truth she had gathered around her. Ruqayyah knew the day of confrontation would come, and she spent nights imagining it over and over. She didn't want drama or violence. She wanted truth, clarity, and justice. When she learned about a family gathering that Cato and his relatives would attend, she saw an opportunity. She would go, not as a scared, abandoned wife, but as a woman armed with evidence, allies, and quiet determination. On the day, she arrived with Zuri and Musa. Her heart beat fast, but she kept her head high. She wore a simple dress, one that made her feel composed and confident. The moment she stepped into the room, the chatter paused. Cato's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition. Not of the woman he had betrayed, but of someone who had grown stronger than he expected. Ruqayyah didn't yell or accuse. She started calmly, recounting facts that anyone could verify. She spoke of the property Cato had secretly sold, the money transferred to Amina, and the threats she had received from his family. She presented the organized documents, bank statements, and messages in clear, methodical order. Musa stood quietly beside her, ready to clarify any legal points if needed. Zuri offered silent support, a reassuring presence that reminded Ruqayyah she was not alone. The The mockery and sneers from Cato's relatives faltered almost immediately. They had expected fear, confusion, maybe tears, but not the composed, precise display of evidence Rukiah now presented. Each revelation was like a mirror held up to their wrongdoing. Cato shifted uncomfortably, his arrogance replaced by a sudden awareness that he had underestimated. For the first time, she realized the power of preparation, of truth, and of having allies who would back her at every turn. Rukiah also noticed her own transformation. She no longer trembled at the thought of his anger. She spoke firmly, calmly, letting the facts speak louder than emotion. She explained how she had documented everything, sought legal counsel, and built a network of supporters. Her confidence wasn't loud or aggressive. It was quiet, undeniable, and unwavering. Each step she took to protect herself and her child had paid off. By the end of the confrontation, the room felt different. Cato's relatives looked at her with a mix of disbelief and unease. Cato himself avoided her gaze, realizing too late that his attempts to control her had backfired completely. Rukiah left the gathering the same way she had entered, calm, composed, and stronger than ever. That day, she felt a sense of closure and power she hadn't known since the cruel text arrived. She had faced the source of her pain and stood tall, proving that betrayal and intimidation could not define her life. She hadn't just confronted Cato and his family, she had confronted fear itself, and won. After the confrontation, Rukiah felt a surge of confidence. She knew the next step was to make it clear that Cato could no longer manipulate or intimidate her. With Musa and Zuri by her side, she arranged another meeting, this time to make formal announcements and set boundaries that could not be ignored. The room was tense when she arrived, but Rukiah walked in with her head held high, calm and composed, knowing exactly what she had to say. She began by stating that she had secured legal control over the marital home and all accounts that Cato had tried to hide or manipulate. She presented the official documents, neatly organized, showing proof of her rights. Every paper, every signature, every legal clause was a silent declaration. She was no longer powerless. The room went quiet. Cato's smugness from before had vanished, replaced by visible unease. His relatives exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. Rukiah didn't stop there. She made it clear that any attempt to interfere with her pregnancy, her living situation, or her child's future would immediately trigger legal consequences. She spoke firmly but without anger, letting the law and her careful preparation do the talking. The calm authority in her voice made the words even more powerful. She could see the shock ripple through Cato's family as they realized that their schemes had failed and that she had taken control of her life in a way they hadn't expected. Even as the tension filled the room, Rukiah remained composed. She didn't shout or lash out. She simply stood her ground, letting the evidence and legal backing speak for her. Cato tried to interject, but Musa was there to clarify every point, ensuring that nothing he said could undermine her position. Zuri offered quiet support, a reminder that Rukiah was not alone in this battle. This moment was more than just about property or money. It was about reclaiming dignity, showing strength, and protecting her child. The realization that she had outmaneuvered Cato without losing her composure brought Rukiah a deep sense of satisfaction. For the first time, she felt fully in control, no longer living under fear or manipulation. By the end of the meeting, it was clear who held the power. Cato's family had no choice but to accept her authority, however reluctantly. They had been confronted with the truth, and the law was on her side. Rukiah walked away that day with a sense of triumph that was quiet but undeniable. She had turned the tables completely, proving that careful planning, courage, and persistence could transform fear and betrayal into empowerment. Rukiah finally moved back into a safe, fully supported home. The space felt different from the small rented room she had fled, not just in size or comfort, but in energy. It was calm, secure, and filled with people who genuinely cared about her and her unborn child. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. She could breathe, rest, and plan without constantly looking over her shoulder. She began taking small, deliberate steps toward financial independence. Each morning, she set aside time to study online business courses, learning skills she had once dreamed of acquiring but never had the chance to explore. She practiced budgeting, researched ways to start her own projects, and slowly built a plan for the future she wanted. It was empowering to see her ideas take shape, knowing that she would not have to rely on anyone who had tried to control her. Rukiah also worked on reconnecting with friends and family who had been her anchors through the chaos. She spent long afternoons talking with Nala, sharing laughter and stories, and rebuilding the trust and joy that Cato's betrayal had tried to destroy. Zuri continued to check in regularly, providing encouragement and advice whenever Rukiah felt doubts creeping in. These relationships reminded her that support wasn't just legal or financial. It was emotional, steady, and healing. As her confidence grew, Rukiah noticed something profound. Cato's attempts to intimidate her no longer had power. She could recall the fear and uncertainty she had felt months earlier, but now it seemed distant, almost foreign. She had faced the betrayal, gathered evidence, taken legal action, and built a network of allies. Her life was hers again. Each decision, each step forward, reinforced her independence and sense of self-worth. Even in quiet moments, when she felt the flutter of her unborn child or watched the sunset from her window, Rukiah felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had reclaimed her dignity, not through confrontation or anger alone, but through strategy, persistence, and courage. She began imagining the life she wanted, safe, stable, and full of possibility. Rukiah also allowed herself small joys. She cooked meals she loved, read books she had put aside, and took walks that reminded her of the strength in moving forward. Every choice she made, no matter how small, felt like a declaration. Her life was hers, and she would shape it on her terms. By the time the weeks passed, Rukiah was no longer defined by betrayal or fear. She was defined by her resilience, her courage, and her determination to build a life that honored herself and her child. She had turned pain into purpose, uncertainty into strategy, and despair into empowerment. For the first time in a long while, Rukiah looked at the future not with fear, but with hope and confidence. Months later, Rukiah held her newborn in her arms for the first time. The tiny fingers curling around hers, the soft, steady breathing, the delicate warmth of life. It was a moment she had dreamed of, feared losing, and finally reclaimed. Her child was healthy, and for Rukiah, that was a victory more profound than any court ruling or legal document. In that quiet room, surrounded by the people who had supported her, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief and pride. Cato's family had no choice but to acknowledge her strength. They had seen her gather evidence, take legal action, and stand firm against manipulation and intimidation. They had watched her confront betrayal with calm and resolve, and now they witnessed her triumph not with anger, but with dignity. Rukiah had not only protected herself and her child, she had reclaimed her life entirely. As she rocked her baby, Rukiah reflected on the journey she had endured. The heartbreak, the fear, the sleepless nights. All of it had tested her in ways she had never imagined. Yet through every setback, she discovered resilience she didn't know she had. She realized her self-worth was not tied to someone else's approval or action. Planning carefully, seeking help, and leaning on her community had turned despair into empowerment. Rukiah wanted other women to hear this truth. Betrayal could be devastating, but it didn't have to be the end. Courage, preparation, and support from others could turn the tide, even against the cruelest actions. She whispered this to herself as she watched her child sleep, a reminder that strength and love could create new beginnings. Holding her baby close, Rukiah smiled softly, knowing that while the past had been painful, her future, and her child's, was bright, safe, and full of possibility. She had survived, reclaimed her dignity, and built a life she could be proud of.